we're doing the second part of the lecture. Looks like this is going to be about 38 slides. The first one took me right at an hour. Actually, a little over an hour, to be honest. I'm going to have to go. I cleaned it up a little bit. Probably going to have to re-give it. So, anyway, part two. All right, first thing we're going to talk about is test taking tips. So first off, if you don't know, you need to go with the first answer choice you were thinking. Generally, that's going to be correct. You're after working thousands of questions, your brain's going to be pretty primed to picking right answers and amongst wrong answers. So, if you really don't know, then just go with the right answer. I'm going to go with the first answer you were thinking about. Also, you don't want to change your answer. I probably need to change this slide to tips. Okay. And you don't want to change your answer unless you're 100% sure that you're changing it to the correct answer. So in this scenario, you missed a not. It said something, something, something not, and you missed the not and you thought it was. Or another way to look at it is, could you look at your, most senior staff member and explain to them why answer B is the actual correct answer, even though you picked answer C? So could you legitimately verbalize why? And then the final thing is, if the imaging or labs or whatever you're presented kind of outside of the STEM or the words or the presentation confuse you, just go with what the STEM says or the presentation is. Meaning, if you're looking at the picture and you're like, I think that's a pleural effusion, but this STEM sure sounds like it's a PE, go with what the STEM says. So if you're confused with the image, go with what the STEM says. Remember, your history and physical account for about, 85% of what you get for the diagnosis. So the majority of the time you're able to answer the question solely off the history and physical, which in this case is the presentation or the STEM, and the labs and the imaging are there to help support that diagnostic workup. Another thing is, just when you're working questions, just remember there's no bad questions, and that it's just you just don't know enough yet. And it's not so much that you might not know enough, and there are some bad questions, but generally speaking, looking at it as though, I remember going through a phase where just feeling like every question was just that's just a bad question. Now that's just a cop-out. You need to learn more, you need to know more, you need to study harder. Don't look for bad questions, don't look for cop-outs, just try to learn the material. Even if the question isn't written perfectly, it's still there testing a point, and it probably still has something to be learned, something to be gained. Weak areas and score improvement. This is where you're going to get the most bang for your buck, meaning that you're going to spend the least amount of time to improve your score the most. So that's really where you want to focus. So here's an example of this. This is one of those little score performance profiles from the Comlex, I do believe. And I think I hawked it offline or something like that. But what you're getting at is, to move from lower performance to borderline performance, so to move from like here to here, you get the same score bump you would to move from borderline performance to high performance. The final goal is to move everything to high performance, sure. But your score increase is the same. Now, the time required to move from, let's say, A area to B area is about half of what it takes to move B to arbitrary point not disclosed out here at the far right. And this has to do with basically the fact that to move your score one standard deviation, or to improve your improve your score one standard deviation. Is it one standard deviation, or is it 10 points, or is it? Anyway, it requires a doubling of your time. I think it's a standard deviation. Yeah, I'm going to go with standard deviation. To improve your score one standard deviation from point X to point Y, one standard deviation away, it requires a doubling of your time. So let's say for A, you studied 10 hours. To move it to B, you would need to study 20 hours. Well, let's say for B, you'd study 20 hours to get it to B. To move it to arbitrary point not disclosed, you would need to study, 40 hours. And I'm going to make arbitrary point not disclosed a point. So let's go with C. Let's go here. Let's bold it. Let's make it 24. Let's make it 30. So first thing you want to do is focus on your weak areas. The reason you want to focus on your weak areas is this is where you get the most bang for your buck. Just remember when you're studying, when you're going to improve an area of study, the weakest areas are the areas that you have to study generally the least to get the most score improvement. Meaning if you were only to improve the low areas here, so these asterisked areas, and you didn't even worry about the rest of this stuff, and that was the only thing you focused on, you would get the most improvement in your score for the least amount of time spent. I think that's said correctly. Kind of muddled around it. So what's commonly tested? For rare diseases, questions are usually asked on common presentations. So for rare diseases, they're going to normally ask common presentations. For common diseases, they're going to usually ask rare presentations. So this is just a general kind of rule of thumb. So whenever you're basically studying diabetes, you need to know everything about diabetes. When you're studying for Creutzfeldt-Jakob, just learn that they have a exaggerated startle response, and it's a neuro case, and that's really all you got to know. So anyway, just something like that. You want to also expect common questions. So what are the common questions? What is the most likely diagnosis? What is the next best step in management, treatment, diagnosis of? What is the best initial diagnostic test? What is the most accurate diagnostic test? What's the best initial treatment? And then what is the most appropriate next step in management? And that by far is going to be the most common question you see on your internal medicine board exams. What is the most appropriate next step in management? Because that could be a test, that could be a treatment, that could be call somebody, it could be anything. But that's going to be the question they ask you the most. You also want to know specifics. So beyond a shadow of a doubt, you're going to get an acid-based question on your test. And if you don't learn acid-based, then you're just giving away free points. So my recommendation would be that you go study acid-based until you know it so well that you can't miss a question. Is this going to require a good bit of time? Yes. But knowing it so well that you can't miss a question is just free points. It's just free points. You won't ever miss anything on acid-base, so you don't even have to worry about acid-base anymore when it gets time for the test to come up. You're like, I know I can get all the acid-base questions right. So you can become confident in that area. So when you see the acid-based question, you don't have dread. You don't skip it. You don't go, this is going to take forever. You just pound it out because you know you can get it right. Same goes for sensitivity, specificity, positive predictive value, negative predictive value. You're going to get one of those questions on your test. So just go sit down, learn those formulas. Don't miss those questions. Those are free points. Those type of things. Other really common things are like GERD management, how many neutrophils or an SBP, which I think is like 250 or something like that. Hypertension management, all that kind of fun stuff. Remember, it's like 5% of your exam. Autoantibodies, those aren't directly tested, but you need to know them because they'll give them to you in a STEM, or they'll give them to you as a part of some labs, and you need to know that Cianca is associated with Wegener's, as so is PR3 or antiproteinase 3 or whatever they say. So you need to know those things, and those are the specifics that you just want to know. Like, really good example, acid-based there. It's also good for stuff that's hard to remember, like your sensitivity, specificity, little formulas, to kind of create a little quick review sheet or cheat sheet that you just have and that you just kind of glance over. Remember, practicing recall of this cheat sheet is probably the most important thing, but just having a little cheat sheet that you remember and review right before your exam is definitely beneficial and can help, at least you consolidate that information to kind of something that you can look at right before you walk in the exam and hopefully help you Do better. Timing. So generally speaking, remember you have about 2 minutes per question. But generally speaking, 10 questions should take you 8 to 10 minutes to work. At least 8 to 10 minutes to work. A little longer is probably fine. If you're really topping out the 2 minutes per question, maybe you're not doing something just right. Whether that's like we talked about earlier, whether that's, I think we were talking about that in a little bit. Oh yeah. Whether that's you're not reading fast enough or you're not just picking an answer fast enough, something like that. We'll talk about that in a minute. But generally speaking, 10 questions should take 8 to 10 minutes. If you're working them way faster, this is the problem that I see the most, or I've seen the most, is that, so let's say 10 questions takes you 5 minutes. You're going so fast that you're making errors. You're definitely missing more questions because of your speed. So you need to practice slowing down and trying to really focus on what they're asking. Also for question review. So now you've worked your 10 questions at 8 to 10 minutes for 10 questions, and then you're going to review those 10 questions. It's okay if that takes a while. The review of the content, especially if it's, kind of the first time you're covering something in a very weak area, the review of 10 questions can take an hour. So especially when you look at like 10 minutes to work it and then 50 minutes to review, that's pretty typical. So don't get too bummed out when it takes you an hour to review 10 questions. You're like, I didn't get anything done. So I guess you did. You really hopefully learned those 10 questions. You learned that content related with it. So that was a good hour spent. Time management usually is not a big deal for the ABIM, or internal medicine board exams. Why? Because you get about 2 minutes per question. If you are continuing to have time management struggles, generally at this point it is related to reading comprehension and then pondering. For reading comprehension, the things to think about are you having true reading difficulty? If this is the case, which is not super uncommon, you need to seek some help. Maybe you can get some additional time. You can talk to somebody. I don't know. Reading and working more questions will generally help. If you're just not the greatest reader, which I definitely can identify with, you just read and work a crap ton of questions, and you'll get better and faster with some time. The other thing you can do is read questions out loud. This forces an additional processing step. So sometimes when we read the question to ourselves, we skip over words, we gloss over things, we miss knots, those type of things. The way to improve this is potentially reading out loud. So then you hear yourself and you're seeing the words on the screen, and you realize, something didn't match up there. The sounds that I heard didn't match the words on the screen. So it allows you to at least hopefully comprehend it a little bit better. And then you can actually practice speed runs. And also just a general statement. You're going to speed up with time. So, you work 1,000 questions. Your first 1,000 is probably going to be slower than your second 1,000. And just because you're just going to get more and more familiar with the content, you're not going to get fooled or tricked. More and more questions are going to get easier. They're going to be just give me's and, yeah, that's a left heart cath. Yeah, you do this. Yeah, you do that. And every time that you concrete one of those questions into, this is definitely that, it really speeds you up. And then speed runs, this is just where you just work questions as fast as you can, just to try to speed yourself up a little bit. I would really only recommend this if you are truly having difficulty finishing on time. Because again, this kind of gets into, if you're trying to move too fast, then you're definitely making errors on the flip side, which is related to just careless errors from not paying attention or trying to go too fast. But again, if you got 60 questions and you're not even answering the last 10 because you're running out of time, you would probably be better off to answer the last 10 and take a careless mistake or two along the way than not answer the last 10. So pondering, this usually occurs just because you don't know enough yet. You can't rule disease X out with your current level of knowledge. Rule in or out disease X. So pondering usually occurs because you just don't know enough yet. You can't rule in or out disease X with your current level of knowledge. So you don't know enough to differentiate aortic dissection from, I don't know, pericardial tamponade, which that's tough. Um, Hopefully you know enough right now to differentiate those two. Anyway, so you just can't rule it out. As you learn more, this will definitely get better. You ponder less. And the questions should be hard, but there also should be some easy questions. But an easy question. Oh, so questions should be hard. You should generally feel that the questions are difficult. But if you get an easy question, it's generally just an easy question. There are going to be some easy questions in there. There's going to be more easy questions than rabbit hole chasing. And this is where you get, don't go down 18 different rabbit holes to arrive at your answer. If you're having to make like 3 plus, so 3 logic jumps is generally the maximum number of logic jumps they're going to want you to make. This would be like a 3-step question, which can generally be like a management question or an associated disease question. But if you're having to make more than 3, so 4, 5, 6 logic jumps to get an answer right, that is generally wrong. That means that either you're looking at it wrong, you're approaching it wrong. This happened to me a good bit early on. I would ponder a lot because I didn't know enough, and I would make these just outlandish logic jumps, and it'd be like 10 jumps, and then I'd be like, that's definitely it. This is where they're going. And it was definitely not it. I never got those questions right. So practice tests and ITEs. My recommendation is to take as many practice tests as possible. I know there's not a lot out there for the internal medicine board exam, but just take as many as you can, as many as you get. Try to set up the scenario, kind of like we talked about earlier. And you want to use them to see what you are good and not good at, just like we talked about earlier, your weak areas, and you want to focus on your weak areas because, again, you get the most bang for your buck when studying, i.e. the least amount of time to get the most score improvement. And personally, I would encourage you to study along the way for your ITE or in-training exam. I know a lot of people say don't study at all, just use it as your baseline, which I think that's reasonable. My statement to this is generally speaking, more studying is better than less studying. So if you study for the ITE, even if you get a knowledge spike right before you take it, and then you take it, so you're spiking your knowledge, then you're testing your knowledge, which is then going to be basically recalling. You're going to have to recall all that knowledge that you just tried to learn for the test, which is then going to strengthen the encoding of the information that you just studied. And then even if you stop studying completely and you fell off the mountain, you're still starting level for the next time that you cram. Remember, you shouldn't cram. Cramming doesn't really work much for these big tests like this because it's just too much content. Then even if you were to cram for your next ITE, you would still be at a higher starting point than you would have been if you just didn't do a darn thing. I feel like, at least personally, when I was in training, the people that said they weren't going to study or didn't want to study for their ITE were essentially saying that I just want to get a baseline, see where my knowledge is. I felt like they were just using an excuse to be lazy, to be completely honest. So, you can review something, you can read something, you can work a couple hundred questions, you can do something. You don't have to stay up all night and cram for the week before. That wouldn't be worth it, but you can do something. Question reviewing, we mentioned this a little bit earlier, so I'm going to move this up. Let's go here. Let's do that. All right, so question review. This is just kind of a website that I found when I was studying back for, I think, USMLE Step 2. But it's the USMLE Thought website. It's basically a PhD that just kind of has done studies, written papers on how to approach how USMLE style questions are approached by different students and stuff like that. and test takers and question writers. I found it's almost more kind of like blog content, but I found it at least helpful, and I found this question review process helpful. So if you knew it, you just move right on. If you guessed, you need to read the explanation. Maybe you need to go back to your study material. Why did you miss it? And if you missed it, why did you miss it? Was it a knowledge gap or was it a process gap? If it was a process gap, you need to rehearse your process, i.e., how did you go at the question? Was there a step you missed, or something like that? So also in the review, so that when you're looking at your questions, some of them you're gonna know it all. For those, you need to spend the minimalist amount of time reviewing it possible. Maybe this means read the bottom line. Some of them you're gonna know part of it, and this is where you want to review what you didn't know, but you got it right. So you knew why A was right, you knew B was wrong, C was wrong, E was wrong, but you weren't real sure about D. You knew it was wrong because you knew A was right, but so you just want to go review that single part that you didn't know, and then maybe the bottom line. So it's a little bit longer, but don't spend a ton of time here. You thought you knew it, but you didn't. This is where you're gonna get the most bang for your buck on the question, and this means that you had pre-existing knowledge on the topic because you thought you knew it, but that knowledge was incorrect, flawed, or there was something wrong with it, and you need to re-encode it in a manner that you can remember it and get it right next time. Now, the challenge with this is that generally speaking, you've got in your mind what you think it is and why you think you missed the question, and generally you're going to default to you missed the question because it was a bad question, or they asked it funny, or they were trying to trick you. But that's not the case. They're not writing these questions to trick you. They're writing these questions to test your knowledge, and it hurts your pride a little bit to toss in the towel and say, well, they were right and I was wrong, and this is how I need to learn it. So basically what I'm getting at is this is where you get the most bang for your buck on these questions you thought you knew but you didn't, but you gotta kind of cave to self, and say, hey, this is really what the content is asking. This is what I really need to go learn. This is what I don't know, and then you need to go obtain that information, whether that means obtain it from the question, obtain it from your secondary source, go watch a video on it, go review your notes, review what they have written, reprocess it, recode it so that you don't miss that type of question again. Because again, this is information that once you obtain it correctly, you shouldn't miss it anymore because you already thought you knew it. So this is one you've heard of before, but you were kind of unsure. Maybe you got it right, maybe you got it wrong. This usually requires almost a complete review. Maybe not like full-fledged, go pull out your old notebook and review it, or go watch a video on YouTube. But it may require that. And, generally speaking, this takes a good bit of time. This is 5 to 7, maybe even 10 minutes to review this question, that you thought of before, but you were kind of unsure of. Let's see, did I put colons? I did on some of them. And then this last one is you guessed and you had absolutely no idea. This is a question where you need to review the content in its totality, and you also need to review a secondary resource. This is generally like if you didn't have any clue what pseudo-gout was, and it was just like, wow, I've never heard of that before. You probably need to go read about pseudo-gout. I know for me, when I was studying for pulmonary boards, it was Swyer-James syndrome or something like that. Never heard of it before. I was like, wow, I have essentially finished pulmonary fellowship, and now I'm being asked questions on things that I've never heard before. And that happened quite a few times. And I remember, I have to really go hunt this down. And I go hunt it down. And I did my best to learn it, and it worked out. So, and the last thing to kind of think about, or at least talk about when you're reviewing questions, is if the question changed at all, could you still gotten the question correct? Like if they asked a diagnosis question instead of a management question, or if they asked a management question instead of a diagnosis question, or if they asked a next test question, or a best test, or an associated finding, could you get all of those questions right for your said disease, or for what you were being asked? And if you could, then you definitely know that content well, and there's no reason for you to spend much more time on it. Time management, talked about this. Okay, practice test, talked about that. Okay, next part is going to talk about kind of some question writing flaws and question writing tips that you can pick up. This is the how questions are written, and it's put out by the NBME, who is the folks that make the USMLE. It's free. You can Google it online, free download it, read it yourself. It's long, but a lot of it's not very applicable. I've actually given a copy of this as well as a copy of the PowerPoint and a copy of a few other things to whoever the coordinator is, and she's hopefully going to distribute it to the group if you wanted to look at it. But this is kind of where some of that content came from. So, whoop. So this first question that we're going to work together is, which of the following is the next best step in management? So of this list, which one is the next best step in management? So you got prednisone, hydralazine, albuterol, midodrine, sildenafil, carvedilol, nifedipine, digoxin, pantoprazole. And I'm not giving you anything. I'm not giving you a stem. I'm not giving you anything. So which one's the best choice here? Well, the right answer would be, didn't bold it. So I need to do home, we need to do shape, I need to do a box. And then we want to do animations and up here. All right, try again. And the right answer is carvedilol. So why is it the right answer? Because you need to know your mortality reducers. Other possible answers here could have been aspirin or torvastatin. These all decrease mortality. Sure, if the stem had been that the person has burning esophagus pain and no red flag symptoms, and pantoprazole might be the right answer. Or if the person has, an acute asthma exacerbation, prednisone might be the right answer, or albuterol might be the right answer. But if they don't give you anything else and you are left with absolutely nothing, pick the answer amongst the choices that decreases mortality. Next one is, which one of the following is the next best step in management? And this one is going to be the longest answer you want to double check. So the right answer here is CT-guided abscess drainage. And the reason that that's the right answer is because generally the longest answer is also the most specific answer. And the most specific answer is generally the right answer. So in this case, the correct answer is this. This also gets into let me go ahead and do this one. If given a bunch of answer choices, the ones that are vague are usually incorrect. Again, most of the time they're trying not to write questions that are this. So, go back here, centesis. Okay. So, all right. So this one's carvedilol. Could also have been aspirin, torvastatin. What is this one? CT-guided abscess drainage. Why? You need to look at the longest answer. Anytime you get the longest answer in a group of choices, especially when it's considerably longer, kind of like this one, just double check it. So if you're working questions and one answer is substantially longer than the other, just double check to make sure that that one is incorrect if you haven't picked it as your correct answer. If you've already picked it as your correct answer, then maybe it's even further confirming bias to say, hey, I got it right. This one, which is the following next best step in management: steroids, antibiotics, surgery, CT scan, thoracentesis. So steroids, how much, when, how long? Antibiotics for what, how much, how long, what kind of antibiotics, surgery of what, CT scan of what, and then thoracentesis. That's very specific. You're going to do it. We know what a thoracentesis is. So vague answers are generally wrong. So all those again, longest answer double check, know the mortality reducers, and vague answers are usually wrong. There's a lot more in that document, but that was just kind of some of the highlight stuff that it was easy for me to point out. And those are at least some easy things that sometimes still make it onto board exams. Most of the time, remember, this is the how to write board style questions, and these were the examples of how not to. So this stuff doesn't make it on board exams, but every once in a while you can see kind of glimmers of it, and you're like, yes, this is the right answer, and I know it's the right answer because I know the content, and I'm also further confirmed because the answer that I'm comparing it against is a little vague or something like that. So, question approach. It's good to have an approach. And it's not so much the approach you use, but just using an approach. And you want what is an approach is just a way that you work questions, and you want to try to work questions the same way every single time. And this is mainly to decrease careless errors or mistakes and oversights. And it's just so that you have a method to your madness. This is how you're going through questions. This is how you're going to work them. Some examples of different approaches are, you can go from the top down. Let's just read it from, word one to the last word. Pick an answer. You can start with the lead-in. That's the question. You can cover up the options. You can go to the answers first. You can do the labs and imaging first. You can do the STEM first, which is just the paragraph. An example approach might be to cover up the answer choices, read the STEM or the lead-in. Then you're going to read the question itself, which is the body of the paragraph thing. Then you're going to read the last sentence. Think of your potential answers. Like I think the answer is going to be thoracenthisis. Then you're going to uncover the answers. Then you're going to start at the bottom and work your way up, looking for confirmation of the thing that you just thought of. This was not the approach that I used. I don't really like this approach because what inevitably happens is, to me, is that you read the last sentence and then you think of your potential answers, and the answer that you think should be down there is not there. And then you look at the answer choices, and then ensues panic because now you've used all this time and everything that you were thinking about is not there, and now you have to just reflip and reread and rethink. So the way I usually started with questions was I'd start with the lead-in, which is the question itself, and then I'd just look at the answer choices. So, okay, what are these answer choices getting at? All right, it looks like this is going to be a chest pain question, and I can probably eliminate this here, eliminate that there. Are they going to be talking about, a tearing pain or a, gnawing, I don't know, GI-like pain? I don't know. Anyway, those two things. Then I read the question. Then I usually try to eliminate answer choices. So I start crossing out stuff. Okay, this is wrong because of this. This is wrong because of this. And then you'd be left with 2, sometimes 3, sometimes 4. Remember, every time you eliminate one, if there's 5 options, you eliminate one, you get your odds of getting it right, go from 1 in 5, which is 20%, to 1 in 4, which is 25%. So you're edging yourself up in the right direction. And you're going to pick an answer. And after you pick an answer, I had move on as the next step. And the reason I had that is because I did have time management struggles, at least early on, when I was studying and working board exams. Crap, I forgot to start the timer. So an example of how I would work questions is I would read the lead-in, which an analog to which of the following hormones may decrease this patient's abdominal pain. And I look at it, so we got cholecystinin, gastrin, secretin, somatostatin, and then vasoactive intestinal peptide. So these are GI hormones. I wouldn't expect any of y'all to know the answer. I don't know the answer. I just had this question pulled from previous. Then I'd read the question. We have chronic alcoholism. We have abdominal pain. I'll look at his CT. He's definitely got chronic pancreatitis. So an analog of which of one of these with chronic pancreatitis may decrease abdominal pain, and that's going to be somatostatin. Somatostatin is going to be the thing that makes your pancreas do less, inhibits release of hormones and stuff like that. So again, some general study tips. You want to set a goal. Did we talk about setting a goal? Where did my set a goal? Oh. Did I forget to save it again? swear this happened to me a few times now. This is super frustrating. I'm worried. I'm like losing content. I mean, I already typed this whole slide out. Where in the heck did it go? Alright, let's just stop.